Hey, what's up, you guys? It's WD3, and this is your Hill Report News Break. Well, everybody's talking about Israel, right? Well, if we look inside of the state of Israel, we'll see, for one, many believe that the blacks in America and throughout some of the Western Hemisphere are the true uh, Israelites. Also, there is economic turmoil in Israel due to their constant state of high alert, not being able to develop their economy in war by having rockets coming over, and it is all of their own doing. Why suffer in Europe and then cause suffering in the Middle East? Well, let's see some more on this story.
And let me be clear, I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself, and I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend itself, because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7, including unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young people at a music festival. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Don't let yourself be fooled. Hamas is not an excuse. It's not an excuse to kill 21,000 Palestinians. It's not an excuse to carpet bomb the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. It's not an excuse to bomb 1,000-year-old mosques or hospitals serving people or schools filled with families who are sheltering from your bombs. It's not an excuse to bomb civilians fleeing on the routes you told them to flee on. It's not an excuse to go and conduct mass roundups of civilians. It's not an excuse to try to expel the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. It's not an excuse for deadly night raids in the West Bank. Hamas is not a valid excuse for genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. That is clear. Don't let yourself be fooled. There is no excuse. There is zero excuse for what Israel has done, has been doing, and will do. Anyways, that's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Make sure you copy the link and repost, and free Palestine.
Israel's military says this video shows its attack on Wednesday in the town of Nur Shams in the West Bank. Israel's military also attacked the West Bank areas of Jenin and Tulkarem early Wednesday. At least 10 Palestinians were killed in the attacks, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Israel says the operation is its most expansive in years and says the attack was to thwart terrorist infrastructure. Other video shows Israeli bulldozers tearing up streets in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority's foreign ministry condemned what they called violation and crimes by Israel and their ongoing operation in Gaza.
Mounting economic calamity that threatens to collapse the state entirely. Quote, over 46,000 businesses have gone bankrupt. Tourism has stopped. Israel's credit rating was lowered. Israeli bonds are sold at the prices of almost junk bond levels. And the foreign investments that have already dropped by 60% in the first quarter of 2023 as a result of the policies of Israel's far-right government before October 7th show no prospects of recovery. The majority of the money invested in Israeli investment funds was diverted to investments abroad because Israelis do not want their own pension funds and insurance funds or their own savings to be tied to the fate of the state of Israel. Now, those business closures, they may actually just be the beginning. An estimate cited by the Times of Israel found that up to 60,000 businesses might close before 2024 is over. This is a greater impact than the COVID pandemic shutdown and would only be exacerbated by an expanded war with Hezbollah and with Iran, the impacts of which, frankly, would be unfathomable. Just think about the realities right now, though, for the Israeli economy. Israeli workers have been called up to participate in the Gaza annihilation, undercutting the country's much celebrated tech sector. Another key sector, tourism, has completely dried up. Construction is at a standstill because the Palestinians that Israel relies on as cheap labor force have been banned from coming to work outside of the occupied territories. Israeli attempts to import foreign workers as a new source of cheap labor have been largely unsuccessful. Turkey has announced a ban on exports to Israel, further crippling the construction industry, and efforts to import from other nations are hampered by the efforts of the Houthis to block shipping into Israeli ports. 250,000 Israelis continue to be internally displaced as a result of the tit-for-tat war with Hezbollah, and panic has set in as Iran threatens a large response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh that occurred on their soil. Now, perhaps the biggest body blow, however, was Intel pulling out of a planned $25 billion investment in the state of Israel, an indication that capital is engaged in their own self-interested BDS, weighing the ever-rising risks of operating in Israel to be greater than the benefits. Even more trouble, though, could be ahead. Here again is Mando Weiss. Israel's power grid, which has largely switched to natural gas, still depends on coal to supply demand. The biggest supplier of coal to Israel is Colombia, which announced that it would suspend coal shipments to Israel as long as the genocide was ongoing. After Colombia, the next two biggest suppliers are South Africa and Russia. Without reliable and continuous electricity, Israel will no longer be able to pretend to be a developed economy. So while the U.S. will apparently never cut Israel off of literally anything, including the 2,000-pound bombs that they used to drop on schools where displaced children are sheltering, the rest of the world apparently not so keen to continue doing business with this terrorist regime. There's another dynamic that's a little harder to quantify here, though. It came up in our recent interview with an Israeli Zionist analyst, Shael Ben Ephraim, who we brought in to discuss the right-wing riots that broke out in Israel to protect the right of Israeli soldiers to rape and torture Palestinian detainees.
I think there's going to be a lot of people in Israel who, if this continues to be the kind of government that they have in the long term, will leave. And those will be the most productive members of society. Those will be the high-tech leaders. Those will be the professors. Those will be the literati and so on and so forth, which is something that I think the extreme right in Israel wants, because that will help them run the country better. And there's an attempt to dismantle the Israeli judicial system, because that's the one check and balance the Israeli system has against this kind of power. So right now, Israel, similar to a lot of other countries in the West, or the United States, as an example, is having a battle for its soul. And I think if the liberal democratic forces in Israel lose, Israel will be lost. It's not going to be able to survive if it doesn't have allies in the world, and it's going to be sanctioned by everyone, treated like a pariah state. That liberal part of the country is what kept Israel as part of the international community, and what kept it allied with the United States, and what kept it as a big trade partner for the EU. And if Israel loses that, it's not going to be able to survive. The extreme right fringe and the fundamentalists aren't going to be able to support the Israeli economy, aren't going to be able to support Israeli society, not in the long term. Many don't serve in the army. It's a disaster for Israel. If these people take over, and this is a step towards taking over, like, make no mistake, they're hindering the functioning of the state. If they completely take over, the state of Israel will not exist in the long term. And I think that's quite a possible outcome.
So Shael alludes there to the fact that the most conservative, ultra-Orthodox members of Israeli society are increasingly represented in terms of governing ideology, but don't actually contribute too much to society. They tend to have large families, rely on government welfare, and receive a religious exemption from military service. The numbers supporting this dynamic were already getting kind of dicey, because this group has much higher birth rates than more secular Israeli Jews. If you see a significant brain drain due to unending war and overt fascism, according to Shael, quote, the state of Israel will not exist in the long term. Bolstering this point, Mando Weiss quoted an Israeli economist, Professor Dan Ben-David, as saying that the Israeli economy is held together by 300,000 people, the senior staff in universities, tech companies, and hospitals. Once a significant portion of those people leaves, he says, we won't become a third world country. We just won't be anymore. Has this exodus already begun? Difficult to say, and frankly, some of the data is really conflicting. But according to the Times of Israel, Israelis have already begun leaving the country prior to October 7th due to the Netanyahu government's extremism and attacks on the judiciary, which had led to a large protest movement for more secular elements of society. That outflow accelerated after October 7th, leading to about 42,000 permanent departures from November through March of 2024. And one can only imagine what an all-out war with Hezbollah and or Iran could do to those numbers in a country where a significant minority of the population hold multiple passports. By enabling the worst of Israeli atrocities and excesses, self-proclaimed Zionist Joe Biden may have unintentionally helped to galvanize a force that could actually destroy the Israeli state. We may be watching in real time as Israel collapses under the weight of its own internal divides, capital's aversion to risk, and the world's revulsion to apartheid and genocide.
Well, thank you guys for hanging out with me, WD3, and your Hill Report News Break. I want you all to like, share, and subscribe to the show. We want to grow the show. This is your news station. The next big story could be your post. Well, you guys comment. I will respond, and I look forward to the discussion.